I'm going to start just by acknowledging that we are meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the first traditional custodians of the country that we're currently gathered on. And I want to acknowledge their elders past and present and extend honour to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that might be here or listening online. And we as a church commit to walking safely, softly and gently on this land that God entrusted to the people of the Kulin Nation first. Alrighty. This seems unlikely, given how much time I've already been up here, but if you don't know, my name is Jo. Hi. Hi. And your bombardment with my presence is because of my poor planning. Apologies. When people contact me and ask me to do stuff, I don't always check my calendar, and that's probably a lesson for me today. So if you don't know anything about me, you now know that I'm poor at planning. So add that to the wonderful list of accolades that I possess. And I also want to acknowledge that I try really hard when we're coming to these spaces to hear God before I get here and bring what I think He's on. I maybe didn't do that very well in the lead up to this one. So I'm aware that I wanted to talk about cult leaders. And there was relevance to that. It wasn't just a fun discussion. But God was very clear this week that in light of everything that has happened it's just been a week since Easter, right? It's still the week after Easter. And it feels like it's been, that's the response I had. Is it really? We don't really know. It's a bit crazy, the world at the moment. And it was that reflection on the fact that I thought maybe this week we'd have, I don't know, nicer international politics, some news that wasn't all bad. You know, I just feel like we're getting bombarded at the moment, and so reframing what I brought today was in response to that. Also, being between the week of Easter and the week of Isaiah, it is Isaiah that you're doing, yeah? I had a real panic for a moment. I'm like, wait, is it Ezekiel? It's not. It's Isaiah. So if anyone's reading Ezekiel, stop. That's not the right book. So it's a fun little bridge in between those two spaces. And so the discussion and conversation that I've been having with God, I'm hoping to bring this morning and invite you guys to be a part of. And hopefully this will be a good launching place for conversation outside of this room rather than a straight and narrow teaching. So now that I've hooked you a little bit, I hope, and you're all thinking, Jo, tell us about the conversation you had. Well, again, I warned you, introvert's nightmare today. We're actually going to do a little activity. And you guys are going to have to say something nice about yourself. So if this is not something that you're good at, a little bit more warning, we're talking about remembering today. And so what I want you to do is to think back, think into your memory, and turn to a neighbour that you feel comfortable talking with, or go to the toilet. And I would love for you to share an achievement that you have done. And your achievement might be something as simple as, I got out of bed on time today. Yeah, that's an achievement with this weather. And it could be something as huge as, I submitted a thesis. It could be about raising a tiny human, or perhaps the time that you learnt how to swim, something that you personally are proud of. 1, 2, 3, go. Hands up if you had something positive to remember and reflect on. Cool, that's almost everyone. I hope that just means some people don't want to put up their hands. That's good. How did it feel telling someone about something you've achieved? Is it good? Yeah? Yeah, some people are feeling groovy, other people are feeling good. How does your posture feel? How are you feeling? Are you sitting upright? Some people are feeling a little tight. That's okay, that may or may not be light. I misheard. Light. The room feels a little bit different than before we started chatting, doesn't it? Just a little bit. And memory can do that. Memory affects us in the now. And it's an interesting and complex topic if we're talking about remembering and memory, which is what we're going to do today. And I want to assure you that I will not be bringing heaps of facts, because there's simply too many when looking at human memory. How our memories form, how we store them, it's crazy. The way our brain processes and retrieves memory, it's a bit crazy as well. Our brain doesn't store everything in the one spot. The way it pulls things together so we can remember an entire experience is nuts. Has anyone ever seen the videos of people who are affected by memory disease, such as dementia or Alzheimer's, and they play music for that person? If you haven't seen it, I would suggest going and giving it a Google on whatever streaming platform you're familiar with. And you can just type in dementia patient listens to music. And we see people whose memories are stored in different parts along with the memory of that music. And when we play, it's almost like people are transported back to that place in time. You see people that perhaps are non-verbal go back to a spot where they might be singing along or having a dance. Memory can pull us out of a disease even. It's a bit crazy. I did try and learn a little bit more about memory since we're talking about it today. And they tried to give me some facts. I'm getting a little bit sick of the generative AI on Google, but it is helpful for these kinds of tasks. They tried to tell me that our brain is able to store the same amount of information as about 4,000 iPhones, which that's a lot of memory. And it's also a little ambiguous because iPhones have different memory amounts that you can purchase. So I guess that it's a nice broad range that accounts for all of us who may have some other issues creating memories. But the takeaway is that our brain is almost limitless in the way it can store information and then store it in a way that we can access it and be affected in this room and affect others. And so I find it really interesting that along with many other great things, the word remember is in the Bible a number of times. And it does depend on your translation. Some will say it's upwards of 200 times. There's a little bit of debate on the exact amount because different translations, if we're using our English Bibles, have different translations for the Hebrew and the Greek words that mean to remember. And so sometimes it won't always translate exactly as the word remember. But I use the English Standard Version when I'm at home by myself. And that one has the word remember mentioned 166 times, which is quite a bit. And there's a great number of verses where the word is very significant, and there's some that it's not so significant. I mean, sometimes it's about the story. Things like the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph but forgot him. We have a word in there, remember, because it helps us with our story. But there's also a great number of words along with remember that tell us about the commandments and expectations of God. Verses like, remember to keep the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. So we have a number of calls to remember along with the context of action. Now, I'm going to be focusing on the Old Testament because I like it better. And the Old Testament word for remember, the Hebrew word, is zokar. And I may be butchering that because I listened to about 4 different recordings of the word and they all said it differently. So I'm not 100% sure on the correct way to say it. But there's Bible scholars in the room. I'm sure you can bother someone if it's important to you. Or you can go and listen to the many recordings that are on the internet and try and work it out. But part of the reason for focusing on the Old Testament is 2/3 of the times that the word remember is used is in the Old Testament. So there's reason to focus on that today. However, if you want to have a look at remembering and God calling us to remember things, have a look at Hebrews. That's a fun one for wrapping up a lot of information and helping us reflect. But if we're looking at the Old Testament word, it's a word that does mean remember, which is important. It's also translated as to record or to think. Remember to bring to mind, recall. So there's a number of ways it can be translated. This particular word is featured really heavily in the book of Deuteronomy, in the Psalms, and in Ezekiel, which might be where my brain was, although Isaiah and Job get a bit of a look in as well. But those books, Deuteronomy, Psalms, and Ezekiel, they focus very much on reminding the Israelite people to remember specifically God's laws and his provisions. Admittedly, Ezekiel's probably a little bit focused on remembering God's dealings with Israel during exile, but it was pretty important at the time for them to reflect on that. Psalms has the highest concentration of calling us to remember. We probably have David to thank for that, King David. He wrote a lot of the Psalms, if you didn't know. And the ones that he authored, a lot of those will call to remember specific things about God. Again, it's his laws and his provisions that we're asked to remember. And I guess it's pretty common for us to ask whenever we see God doing something with intention, why? Why would God call us to remember these things? Well, it helps us stay out of trouble if we're remembering laws. We're also more likely to favour focusing and trusting on God when we remember what he does. But I want to have a little bit of a look at some of the psychology around relationships and memory. The way that we store memory, of course, it helps us in our relationships. Memories and emotions are intertwined and stored in our brain in a way that remembering a loved one can fill us with joy at our experiences with them, or maybe sorrow if we're missing them. We can get excited at the thoughts of a past or a future adventure. And so if we were dealing with a big, vacant, completely impersonal deity, these things may not be important. However, we go and we live alongside with the Holy Spirit in us in relationship with a God who wants to interact with us. And because of that, I think it's very important to take time to remember and reflect on what he's done because of the way it impacts our relationship with him, rather than just a memory of a faith. I need to take off my jumper. I'm getting really hot. So, we have a big God who's very personal and has designed our brains to work in a particular way. Now, I did have a look at some studies, and so you know I'm not making stuff up. If you want the links for said studies, I can provide them, but I don't have them here on the slides or anything today. And the studies that I was looking at were dealing specifically with marriage and the way that memory impacts the longevity of a marriage. A couple of the studies were actually focused on laughter rather than the relationships themselves, and some of the findings were kind of side findings along with the information they found about laughter. And they found that by simply choosing to remember a time in these people's marriage where they just laughed together, that could predict some of the outcomes for their relationship. So if we were taking time to reflect on a good time with a partner and when we've had fun and laughed about it, just the act of regularly remembering that thing has a positive impact on the relationship itself in the present. I'm just checking my notes about something, sorry. It's also super important in that when we remember things, they often set us up for better experiences together after that. If you was going to be real sexist, I'm going to do it anyway. If you are a lady in here and you've had someone forget an important anniversary or birthday, how did you feel? The laughter says a lot, right? No one's feeling confident to just chuck it out there and throw anyone under the bus. But when we forget important and key events, it can impact our relationship as well, because it speaks to the care that we may or may not have for the person that we're sharing our life with. Memories within relationships also help with pattern recognition. If someone constantly turns up and is faithful to their word, our brain records that. It recognises the pattern that they are trustworthy, and it helps us intentionally build into the relationship because past patterns are the best indicator of future patterns. So the call to remember and the encouragement in the context of a relationship with our God, rather than just in response to a command, kind of ties in with our current understanding of how relationships work. When God is asking us to remember, he's asking us, yes, to reflect on his provision, to look at the patterns of the relationship, and also to consider how we might be able to remember for the future, which ties in really well with our Hebrew understanding of the word. We are going to take a little break. You may have noticed that I'm a little high-strung today because I've been up the front a lot. And sometimes that stresses me out. So this is actually just a fun little thing for me to have a moment. Apologies. Turn to the person next to you. Sorry, introverts. Many of the people in here, I'm assuming you have at least one positive relationship. And if you don't, now is a great time to form one. Grab someone, and we're going to have some fun. Tell the person with you a story about a time where you were with someone that you care about and you had a good old belly laugh. Go. Okay. Thanks for the breather, guys. I feel like I've got my notes in order now, so I appreciate that. Talking of anniversaries and the remembrance of that, on the flip side, we have probably some people in the room that have been the forgetter of those significant events. And it's never nice when you realise in the moment, oh, I didn't do the thing. I didn't call someone, I didn't do that. And so this idea of remembering for the future, it's called remembering prospectively, which is a bit fancy sounding. But I really like the idea, and although it sounds fancy, it's talking about our remembering for the purpose of future decisions, for the purpose of future actions. So I'm hoping that everyone in here remembers to pay their bills, yeah? When we remember to do that, that's some of that prospective remembering, where we're remembering for the future. We do it every day, paying our bills. You put something in the oven, you remember that you have to take it out eventually. And if we don't, there's a house fire, okay? So reflecting on it, it's an interesting thought, and it's specifically within this study that I was looking at about relationships, because along with remembering the good times, which sets us up for happiness going forward, having this remembrance for events, for specific things, and for engagement, the prospective remembering, also has a huge implication on people's happiness within their marriages. And it's an interesting one because this ties quite nicely into the Hebrew understanding of the word remembering. I think it's pretty common that when we bring a word and we look at the Hebrew history of it, it's very rare that we have something that's not just a thought. When we think, oh, we're struggling today, when we think of remembering, it's something that in our English understanding, we will often do it in our brains. Remembering happens in here. Where remembering with a Hebrew mindset was about a call to action. You probably know a number of verses where it says something along the lines of, when will God remember us? And the idea behind that is when we remember something, we act upon it. You don't remember the goodness of God and then don't act out of the knowledge of the goodness of God. If we remember that there are suffering in the world, the expectation is that we won't just be like, oh yeah, I'm aware that people suffer. Okay, back to work. The idea is that the remembering is a kick-off point for the action that follows. So when we're asked to reflect and God is calling us, remember my good deeds, remember my laws, remember my faithfulness, it's not just I want you to sit and reflect quietly and consider that I have done these things. He's asking us to reflect on it, yes, but with the purpose of expectation of action. When God asks us to remember the Sabbath, it's not just a call to say, oh, yes, it's definitely Sunday. It's a call to say, so what are you going to do when you remember? And because we're going to choose to follow God and his commandments, remembering his promises and remembering his calls to actions are super important for now. We're not just going to look and go, oh, God wants us to remember all of his acts and all the things that he's done because it's a nice thing to do. It's to set us up for the action of trust and moving forward in that relationship. We're going to do one more little thing where we go and talk to our neighbour, because sometimes we don't have the knowledge to remember well what's in the Bible and the things that have been reported over a very long history of God's faithfulness and promise. And that's where testimony comes in. Testimony is where we get to remember for someone else a little bit. So what I would love for you to do in the next minute, we're not going to spend a long time on this one because you may like to have conversation after, is this time I want you to turn to the person next to you, and if you can, remember something that God has done for you personally. Has he given you an instruction that you had to keep? Has he given you a provision that you'd like to reflect on? And you can keep it as short and succinct as you possibly want, but turn to the person next to you And let's remember a law or a provision that you've gotten specific from God, and any story that might need to go along with that, as concise as you can. 3, 2, 1, go. Alrighty. I've made you guys share quite a bit today, so as I'm pulling you back in, I think it's only fair that I share a little bit as well. I think that's a fair thing to do. And as we're heading into that, you might be asking, Joe, you're talking a lot about these weird specific memories, and you're asking us to reflect on how this works with psychology. It's not very biblically focused. I want to promise you that God made you, and so if we're wired for this particular thing, if they're discovering that there's particular things about memory that impact us significantly, I'm inclined to believe that we're discovering part of God's design. That's psychology, that's science. It's not separate from God, but rather it's revealing a part of him and his nature in a new way that we maybe didn't understand before. And the reason I'm asking us to do a lot of this is because as I was reflecting on what to bring this week, it's really hard to focus. I did touch a little bit at the beginning of this little chat, that there's a lot of stuff happening in our world. And I don't think it's fair to come up here and try and pretend that it's not. We do have international political unrest right now. We do have financial issues across the board, whether it's where my boss can't even fill up her car to come to work. You know, it's costing her $500. And I don't imagine that she's the only person that's experiencing that kind of issue. And it can be really easy, particularly if you're someone like me who's prone to anxious thoughts, to be remembering. But we only really remember what the negative stuff is. And that's part of our survival. We focus on those things. Of the 50,000 things that we look at in a day, something like 70% of those inputs that we have in our brain are negative. We are very able to fall into a pattern recognition process and use our memory for evil. Well, not evil necessarily, but in a way that doesn't benefit us. And so at the moment, looking at all these things and what's happening in the world, even becoming a bit obsessive. I don't know if you guys do that. I found that I had to delete my news apps off my phone because I just kept checking, because I just knew that there was probably a particular individual that had said something really interesting in the past 20 minutes on an online forum. And for that reason, I had to choose to stop going on and looking at it and instead take time to remember some positive things. Because if we don't, our brains are going to reward us for those new neural pathways. Whenever you have a new thought, we create a new pathway in our brain. And it's those pathways that when we continue to use them, they become reinforced, they become stronger. And for that reason, if we are in the habit of thinking and focusing on negative things, we are reiterating those neural pathways, and the consequence is it's easier for us to think negative. And if God has wired us, and he's considered that, the call to remember his goodness and his promises, his faithfulness and his laws for our protection, make a lot of sense. He's asking us not just to have a good story to tell, but he's asking us to rewire our brains, to renew our minds, which is in the Bible, for the purpose of honouring him and living a way that honours him. Okay. So, in these times of financial unrest, I'm going to share a fun little story about financial provision, because this is how we combat some of that with testimony, right? And this was many, many moons ago, so don't ask me for a loan. But when I was looking at coming to this church, so we're looking 10 years ago, I was very keen. I was at a different church at the time. My housemate and I were both at this other church. We ran the youth group there. We were very heavily involved, and we hated it because, unfortunately, we had some toxic leadership. And I don't know if you guys have ever had the privilege of experiencing a bad manager or a toxic leader, but it affects every aspect of interaction with that spot. And it was a really difficult time. And so I was talking to my housemate, and we were reflecting on how this Die Hocking and that we'd never really had much to do with. She saw us at a thing and she emailed us and said, "We're having a women's retreat. Would you like to come along? It's about this much." And Jade, my housemate, was very keen. And I was a broke student at the time. And my response was, well, if God wants me to do it, God can pay for it. Which was fine until I got $3,000 of back pay from Centrelink, which never happens, within that 24-hour period after that conversation. So when I'm in these moments of going, I don't really have enough to make ends meet, I get to reflect and go, no, God is able to provide. Was that all happening in the back? Probably. But I can see that God's provision and timing, he knew that I would probably be weighing up those possibilities of going on that camp. And it's meant that because of his provision in that moment, I now get to remember not just that, but all of the wonderful memories within this church family, the youth group that I've been a privilege of being a part of. There's a lot of new things that now I can reflect on, and they speak to God's faithfulness as well. It's almost like he's got a plan. Almost. And so that's what we're going to finish up on. Not Joe's wonderful financial breakthrough, but this expectation that God has on us. Because remember, 166 times, that's a number of times that he's asked us to remember something in the Bible. Or someone didn't remember and he had to point it out. But he's continually calling us to remember his faithfulness, to remember his goodness. And I believe it is with the purpose of not just having a warm fuzzy, although we got to do that today. It's not just that we got to reflect and have a giggle about the times where we've had a fun time with someone else, but because God recognises the way that our brains are wired and how he wants us to have relationship rather than a mindless response. He wants us to have that looking back and also planning forward together. And he's wired our brains specifically for that. And so the way I'd like to end today, that was a slam, the way I'd like to end today is with our ministry team, wherever they might be. Do we have a ministry team today? Put your hand up if you're on team. All right. We're going to get them to get up in a second, and what we would love to do is invite people to interact with what we're doing in a couple of ways. You can, if you feel that your brain might need renewing. Perhaps you felt that you've reinforced some of those negative neural pathways for a little too long, and you're in a habit of focusing on the negatives around us. I might be one of those people. Come and get some prayer today with someone external, because if we're in our echo chamber, we don't always get out of it easily. So if you would like to have prayer to renew your mind and focus in on those new neural pathways that God's calling us to forge by remembering him, I'd encourage you to come and join the prayer team in a moment. And for anyone else that is maybe not feeling like, actually my neural pathways are silly and I don't need to rewire them, maybe you're feeling very confident in your ability to remember and reflect, then we'll take some time where we are to just finish with a conversation with each other. This is how I'm feeling today. This is how I reflect and remember. Share a little something about what your walk with God looks like, because I feel like we come in and we don't always get to do that. It's not a moment to interrogate someone. Don't ask them, how's your walk with God? And like point a finger and do that. We're going to let people share. Where are you in your conversation with God about remembering his goodness? How does that work for you and what does that look like? And hopefully we can give each other a few tips on what that looks like outside of reading our Bible, although that might be your primary way, and reflecting on other people's testimonies when we don't have our own. Does that sound like an okay way to finish before we get tea and coffee and party down? Yes. Alrighty. So prayer team, we're going to get you to come up. And while they're doing that, I'm going to do a general prayer, and people then get to respond however they'd like to. All right? You can walk, it's all good. So Father God, as our prayer team gathers, we want to acknowledge their servant hearts and their choices to reflect. Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm praying, my bad. Yeah, and then I'll let you guys chat. We want to thank you for your call to remember, that you've wired us specifically in a way that remembering honours you when we do it right, that remembering guides us and calls us into deeper intimacy and relationship with you when we get it right. So God, we're asking for you to help us get it right. Help us to remember in a way that honours you. Help us to pull our focus on what is good, what is righteous, what is beautiful. Help us focus in on your face and your hands and reflect on the way that you remember with action. God, we ask that you help us remember in a way that calls us to act, first and foremost, with the refreshing and renewing of our minds. And all the people said, Amen.